Allie with Potomac Beads, and in this Better Beader episode, we are going to go over how to increase and decrease peyote stitch. I know this is a technique and a skill that a lot of people still struggle on and wonder about, and I've gone over it in some of the project-specific videos, but I thought it would be nice, thanks for the suggestion out there in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, to make this video showing you how to simply increase and decrease your rows of peyote stitch. So you can see here I have a sample piece. I started with 6 beads, meaning that it's that wide, and then I showed how to increase on one side, the other side, and then decrease. So I want to show you how this occurs and how you get started. If you've never learned peyote stitch before, it's a nice thing to know ahead of time how to increase and decrease in case a project calls for it. But you may also want to watch some other YouTube videos that we have on peyote stitch to help answer some of your questions prior to learning how to increase and decrease. So I have 6 beads on here. This is going to be the width of my project. And I'm going to go back and add another bead on, number 7, and sew through, back through towards the stop bead, bead number 5. Now I really prefer to do peyote stitch when you're learning it with cubes. They make a great instructional skill. Add another bead, go back through bead number 3. Add another bead, go back through bead number 1. So this here is actually 3 rows of our peyote stitch that I have on here. And you can see row number 1, row number 2, row number 3 as you're working with it. We're going to do a 4th row, and you can see then and establish that my peyote stitch is going nicely with my 6 rows wide. I always suggest to do even count peyote if it's your first time. I have a video on how to do odd count peyote and an easy way to do the odd count, so check that out. So after you have a couple rows of your peyote stitch, and you can see I'm just picking up a bead, skipping over the next one that sits recessed, and going in to the one that sticks up from the previous row. So each row I'm adding 3 beads at a time. What happens if I need to make it so that way, say I'm doing a fish or something, and I need to go up for their scales? I'm going to open a different color to show you. And again, these are the Miyuki 4mm cubes. I like the cubes because they're really easy to see what's going on. From here, say I want to add and do another 2 rows of my peyote. So 2 columns basically wide. I'm doing 2 because I want it to stay even count. I'm going to add 3 beads, and these are in that mauve color. After I add the 3 beads, I want you to sew back through bead number 1 of those towards the project. So you get 3 beads on, skip over the 2, and sew back through bead number 1. Those beads are going to fold right over and next to one another, and you want to pull it right up to your peyote stitch. From here then, I'll continue on with my rows of my green here and add my 3 beads. And then you're going to notice we'll switch over to purple. And you can see I was originally starting out with 6 rows of my peyote stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I have 7 and 8. When I come back down the project from adding those in, you'll be able to see and recognize, get a couple more out here, how it goes in, and now add 4 at a time per each row. So here's bead number 1, here's bead number 2, here's bead number 3, and then instead of being done and continuing on to go up to the next row, I have the opportunity from the beads that I added to add a 4th bead. If I want to then, I can keep going, switching the direction, and now again I'm at 4 beads at a time, 8 beads wide. If I want to, coming off this side here, I can add again. So I can go in here and I can pick up my 3 beads, go into the project here. Oh, that guy's got a little block. Adding my 3 beads then, I'm going to show you when we get down here how we can expand even more. 3 beads go on, go back into bead number 1 towards the project, letting beads number 2 and 3 fold over and sit right next to each other. From here then, you can notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rows now of the peyote. So I can go in and I can add in my beads to the interior. There's bead number 1, bead number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now what happens if I want to add on to the rows that I've already used to add on? Easy, same exact technique. So I'm going to pick up my teal beads for this one here. 3 more beads go on, and we're going to add on to our purple. Again, go back through bead number 1 towards the project. Beads number 2 and 3, force them to sit right next to one another. And then continue on with your stitch. So continuing on with my stitch, I'm going back through here. And now if I count, I'm going to end up with 12 rows of my peyote stitch. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right, so that's as wide as we're going to go. Now how are we going to decrease? So I'm going to do a whole row here, adding in some of these green beads. And I'm going to show you the quick way to decrease. It's going to depend on the project that you're using as far as a decrease goes. So we have our 1 row of our green in there. And now I'm going to switch back to the purple so that way you can see how to do the decrease. And to do the decrease here, I'm going to go back in, and instead of turning right around and putting on a bead and then sewing through, that's going to continue on with my stitch. What I'm going to do, I'll do 1 row like this, and then I'll show you how we're going to decrease. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and give a little thumbs up if you like these kind of simple tutorials. 5, and also make sure to comment 6, and let us know which videos you really like, what style you like, what tricks and techniques that you do for doing the peyote, adding or subtracting for it. So now here I want to decrease. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beads that I added in this row. The next row I don't want to add 6. Maybe my little section down here on my critter that I'm building or the dress on my doll is all finished. What do I do then? You're going to sew back a row. I'm sewing back a row, so I'm coming out the edge. Instead of adding a bead and going to the top, I'm sewing back a row. From here, this is the quick way. I'm going to sew back out through the last bead that I added. This is going to stretch the thread on a diagonal from this back row here to the front. If I want to, and I want to take a little bit more time, I can sew back down through here, back down through this bead, through this one, back up through this guy, back through here, and around. So you're going to do basically a little skirting around of getting it back up so you don't see any thread showing. With my nice beads, that size and the spacing that they are, I can hide the thread there and do this really simple cheat to go in and take over and be downsizing basically. So now I'm going to go in here, add more of my purple. And as I add my purple then, and come on through, when I get to the end, so I downgraded there, you can see that diagonal starting. Really I should have 1 more there in that last row. And as the diagonal starts to downgrade here, say if I'm at the end here and I want to do the same thing. So the quick, easy way to downgrade and not add any more, again, sew back 1 row, and then sew back through the bead that you just added, back towards the center of the design. Add a couple more beads on, and I'm naturally now decreasing my amount of my beads that I'm adding in my peyote rows. Same deal here. I don't want to add another bead on. So what I'm going to do is go back a row, right there, stepping down to the bead right below where your thread is coming out of, sewing on a diagonal up to the one I just added. I'm going to then go in, and I'm going to show you now how we're going to go in and do this the long way. So if you do want to have no thread showing, you're using smaller beads, and you see that on the diagonal. If I'm going back through now, and I have 1 bead and 2 beads that I'm going to add. Now what happens if I don't want to see thread? So I go back down here, I'm going 1 below in that same row of peyote stitch, and then normally I'll just cross over and go right into the bead that I just was out of. What happens if you do see the thread a lot and you don't want to? Here's the real way to do it basically. I'm going to sew down 1 more bead. So I'm sewing down 1 bead that's on a diagonal. I'm going to reverse the thread, go right back into the bead that sits on top of that one that was on a diagonal, and then back through the bead that I went into when I went back a stitch from the previous row. So I was coming out here, I went down through the bead that my needle's currently coming through, on a diagonal through the green, through the bead on top of it, back into my original bead, and then up into that new bead that I'm trying to come out of. From here then, I go through the bead that I just added, add my final bead for my point, and away I go. Now again, what happens if I say, oh man, I need to add some more beads here? If you want to add some more beads and you want to get back into that growth section again, what you're going to do to grow your peyote stitch or increase is the same thing. Take 3 beads after your last peyote bead, go back through the first bead, have them turn to the side here, one on top of the other. If you want to, you can stitch back then and connect them, and you just continue on. Going back here too, if I want to add more on, same deal, add 3 beads, stitch back into it, have those sit on top, and now magically my peyote stitch is getting bigger again. So it goes from getting smaller to getting bigger, adding beads on in. Now I'm back to my row of 6 and continuing on with a stitch. So you can go bigger, smaller, add in rows, subtract rows. If you want to reconnect this row, which really it would just be, you wouldn't have downgraded yet, you can sew back in and kind of snake around to add back in. But these are the really simple ways to add and subtract rows to your peyote stitch. Now obviously this is not incredibly all-inclusive because I have some other videos on how to do the odd count and how to kind of switch the needle and sew back through. But this is an idea of how you increase, decrease, and you probably have a peyote pattern sitting around that you've been intimidated about because you're not sure how to get that extra row when it sticks out the side. If you need a little flamingo leg, how do you make it happen? Hopefully this helped with some of those different information to get you to understand the increasing and the decreasing of peyote stitch. Thanks so much for joining us in this Better Beader episode. Remember, if you have any suggestions for Better Beader episodes, drop them in the comments below, and we're happy to answer any questions that you feel are unanswered to help make you, again, a better beader. We hope as much as possible to be your online bead shop in order to help you through projects, help assist you, and help to gain knowledge and inspire your creativity. As always with these videos, if you're not subscribed, make sure to hit that little subscribe button, as well as shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and enjoy learning and maybe actually tackling that project that uses increasing and decreasing peyote stitch.